2019 was a pretty alright year, all things considered, but more importantly was the fact that it was the end of an entire decade. I don't know if I speak for everyone when I say this, but I noticed that myself and a lot of fellow peers were looking forward to the new decade with a ton of hope. So much so that my boy Makoto shed a tear. True fact, look it up. But oh my god, shoutouts to every single one of you watching because somehow we made it. Now we celebrate by looking back on all the great media that helped get us through, particularly the great video games. Although, if you're curious, I also listened to a ton of great music and watched plenty of amazing movies, live action shows, and I started getting back into anime, which was a blast, but if I spend too long on those, I'll either get copyright struck or lose my audience due to disinterest. So let's stick with what I know best. Lots of big names hit the market hard this year, and even a bunch of smaller titles brought the heat as well, plenty of which I wasn't able to keep up with, but I did play a good amount, and of course did some catch up with games hanging around the good old backlog, all culminating into the list I've so graciously provided for you all. You're welcome, by the way. Much like previous year's installments in this little tradition, I'm not only including new releases, but older titles I happened to experience for the first time, a rule even the Game Awards followed. But honestly, that's the only rule I'm going to be including this time around. Rather than simply ranking this list based on which games I played this year I preferred over others, I wanted to take other factors into consideration as well. How much of an impact did these games have on me in regards to this specific year? How much time did I put into these games? What titles feel more right on this list than others? Instead of exclusively being a comparison on general quality alone, this list ended up being one big vibe check, making for a very different list than I expected, but one that felt more in line with my feelings than other potential orders. Does that make sense? I think that makes sense, so we're going with it. All that being said, we've got some quality content to dive into already. 2020 may have sucked, but my top 10 games I played in 2020 didn't. So without further ado, let's bring them out. Starting with... Been a while, guys. Animal Crossing New Horizons, the game that we didn't deserve but undeniably needed. A lot of my IRL friends are huge Animal Crossing fans who are looking forward to this game, and as someone who never played a game in the series, I was excited for my first foray into it all. Although this particular one, as far as I can tell, deviates from the series roots quite a bit, so yeah, that's a thing I guess. But all of that's neither here nor there, because when it was all said and done, even if you're never really done with Animal Crossing, I could say that I've been enjoying my time with the game. It's one all about vibing and making it so that your island is the best it can possibly be, but both of those sides of the New Horizons coin ended up feeling a bit at odds. I don't really want to decorate my entire island like a lot of my friends have done, to great avail no doubt. I just wanted to chill out and get to know my villagers, which I had assumed would be the real substance of the game, but I don't know. They're all cool and I'm very happy with everyone on my island, but they don't feel as fleshed out as I was hoping and almost come off as accessories. It doesn't help that there's the whole culture of people looking for specific villagers who are cuter than others. There's clearly a focus on decking out your new island, and with as much success as this game has seen, there's definitely an audience for this both within and outside of the Animal Crossing fanbase. So kudos to this game for taking the series in a different direction and making it work for a lot of people. Hell, it worked on me to an extent, as I spent a good amount of time doing would-be monotonous tasks thanks to the relaxing music and cutesy design of the game hypnotizing me into going through the motions. Plus, I got to connect with a lot of my friends and spend time with them in a year where that'd normally be impossible, hence why the game made its way onto the list in the first place. It played a big role in helping me through the field of fire that was 2020, but even still, over time this has become a game I pop in every now and then whenever there's a big update that piques my interest or I want to hang out with some friends on their much better looking islands, meaning I didn't spend nearly as much time on it as others, let alone other games on this list. Chalk that up as the big reason it's at the bottom. New Horizons definitely earned its spot on my personal list, just not as much as the others. Regardless, the game was graciously given to me as a way for me to kick back and relax, and despite me feeling as if I'm going against a good chunk of its intentions, that's exactly what it became, and I wouldn't want it any other way. I have a feeling I'm gonna have a much different and potentially better time with other Animal Crossing games should I decide to go back and play them, but for now, this'll do just fine. Tales of Crestoria is a very interesting game. This is something I went from being indifferent to really excited about, and since its release, I've played it a lot, but as time progressed, much like mobile games tend to do, I'm very off and on with it nowadays. Turns out that when you take a lot of time to produce long-form YouTube content, practice self-love, pursue an education, and make time for friends in order to maintain a social life, you end up not having a lot of time to play games on your phone. Crazy, I know, but the proof is in the pudding. There's a lot I like about this game and a lot I don't, but all things considered, I find it to be the strongest mobile title the series has provided thus far. Link was way too simple that I got bored, and Raze was way too complicated for touchscreen controls that I couldn't be bothered. Crestoria manages to hit that perfect middle ground in the gameplay department, making for something that feels nothing like a typical entry in the series, working nevertheless. I do think that it could stand to have a couple of extra mechanics or room for customization to make it more engaging, as its admittedly shallow combat system has proved to be the biggest contributing factor to my waning interest, but I've still played a good amount of it due to the addicting gacha elements ruining my life once again. I hate to love these types of games, and this one's no exception. It doesn't help that this game's collectibles are my favorite group of characters ever, and the Memoria Stone artwork you're rewarded with upon a lucky summon look drop-dead gorgeous. This game in general looks solid, especially when you take into consideration how it's a freaking mobile game on par with a few of the PS3 era titles. The soundtrack is also way better than it has any right to be. This game presents itself on a level I don't think any of us were expecting. So credit where credit is due. There's a pick up and play mentality to how Crestoria designs itself, but it manages to do this without sacrificing a mostly cohesive story. It's not complete at the time of this video, but it's cute so far. I'm not too big on the original characters, unfortunately, so plot elements end up not hitting as hard as they could, and I do feel that a good amount of the darker story moments are kinda done for shock value. However, it's the most solid narrative out of the crossover bunch, managing to contextualize the legacy characters in this new world without feeling forced. Crestoria ends up being a very ambitious celebration of the series while managing to stand as its own thing. While I don't like it as much as I wish I did, I still sunk a ton of time into the game and will inevitably spend even more as additional content and polish are added to the game. Needless to say, this was one of the biggest things to come out of the Tales 25th anniversary so far. Whether that's more of a positive or negative thing, I'll leave to your own discretion. What do I think? Oh look, the number 8 segment. Alright, so the previous two games definitely had an impact on me over the course of the year, hence why they're on the list, but overall provided me with some mixed feelings. From this point on, we're talking about the games that I really enjoy, so the controversial games are now behind us. Well, damn. Pokemon Sword is an incredibly flawed game for a mountain of justifiable reasons. Being the latest entry in what's literally the biggest multimedia franchise of all time, you'd think we could do better. The story's straight to the point, safe, and arguably bad in many cases. It's laughably short and not even all that replayable to compensate. There are a few design liberties taken to innovate in a game series begging for some fresh new ideas, and the game doesn't even have every single Pokemon up to this point. Believe me, I get it. If my favorite game franchise's newest entry were to play it as safe as this one, I'd be upset too. No pressure or anything arise. So riddle me this. Why do I still like this game as much as I do? Well, since there is no way for me to hear your answer to this question unless you were to, say, join my Discord, follow me on Twitter in order to @ me, or even join my Patreon in order to get an even quicker access with me for just $1 a month, I'll just tell you why. A mid-Pokemon game is still a good video game. Pokemon Sword, in the context of this series, is mid. Does that make it bad? In my opinion, absolutely not, because a game's quality in its respective series doesn't exactly line up with its quality as a game in its own right. With this in mind, making this distinction ended up being really important with Sword. I like Pokemon games in general, so I like this game as a result. Notice how I didn't bring up the graphics as a negative, by the way, because I've always been a fan of this game's shading and color palette. It has whispers of the anime's art style, with both the new Pokemon and characters sporting some of my favorite designs across the series. So limitations aside, I was visually pleased. I also love how this particular region is based off of the United Kingdom, as this made for some gorgeous scenery aplenty. The music is a bop, too. It's been a while since I played a Pokemon game. I actually skipped Ultra Sun and Moon, so I forgot how good this franchise is in terms of the soundtracks, with this entry failing to disappoint. And of course, the battle system's your good old-fashioned turn-based combat. Very simple turn-based combat when compared to a lot of other games, let alone a lot easier, but the variety stems from the wide array of Pokemon available to capture, which on that note, the whole National Dex crap never bothered me. I've yet to feel the need to complete it in any game out of this series, and I still felt like there was a ton of room to customize my team in the exact way I wanted to. I had a great collection of creatures to choose from, both old and new, meaning I found myself experimenting with different builds quite a lot. It was fun. Actually, that's the big contributing factor right there. This game, flaws and all, still managed to be a lot of fun. When I look at a game for the sake of a review, I give it the old critical eye, and if I were doing that with this game, my dudes, I would be having a field day. But when playing this game, I was just vibing, and since I come at these countdown videos as the overly optimistic fanboy I truly am, I feel no shame in admitting how much I enjoyed my time with this particular entry. We can do better, we have done better, but this is still nice, and when it was all said and done, I didn't regret my time one bit. Blaster Master 02 once again graces us with its presence. This is like the third ranking video in a row I'm gushing about this game, and that was honestly one of the things I was trying to avoid when ordering this list. For as much as I still love every game I listed in my recent indie games countdown, taking the impact they had on my personal year into consideration helped shake up the list enough so that I would be able to highlight games I don't talk about as much. I know not everyone watching this is a regular for the channel, and heck, this could very well be your first rodeo here, so as far as I know, this is something literally no one would notice or care about. But I digress, because in this game's case, it couldn't be helped. From that first playthrough alone, I knew this game was something special, and I don't mean to pat my own back or anything, but when am I ever wrong? This means, technically, Xillia is an early PS3 game. Not to mention, the main character of the game is not only female, but openly gay, and that is on the PC with some handy-dandy modding. Alright, I got it. I was only wrong 3 times in my life, big deal. I played this and the first Blaster Master Zero back-to-back, and after playing both games a couple of more times, I honestly find my opinions on them to be a lot closer than ever before. They're both excellent titles for a variety of different reasons, but the ways in which this game soars tends to fall more in line with what I look for in a great video game. This incredibly odd marriage of different gameplay styles make for this unique, out-of-pocket experience that works way better than it has any right to, combining 2D Metroidvania exploration with a top-down dungeon crawling shooter. Starting with the former, the overworld is split into big chunks given that this is a space adventure that spans across many planets. I much prefer a big interconnected world in my Metroidvanias, having areas that weave between one another, but I didn't mind this too much here due to the involved level design and variety in general. And the Sophia, your tank, has a lot of new interesting upgrades this time around to compensate for all of this. I especially loved the mini planets that acted as bite-sized obstacle courses that would even occasionally have you hop out of your tank in order to travel on foot. This game wasn't afraid to mix things up, having much more set pieces that shook up the game's established formula than the original, and those top-down segments were even better, again having much more involved designs and set pieces. The gun upgrades were a lot more interesting too. The first game featured a typical level progression where the higher tier guns were simply more powerful than the lower tier ones, which made a lot of sense. If you got hit, your gun would downgrade to the weaker ones, meaning your reward for skillful play was the more powerful stuff. But here, your reward is the gift of more options, and I honestly prefer this. Higher tier weapons aren't necessarily better than the others, but have their uses in different situations that you'd only be able to take advantage of should you play well enough. Heck, the supposed strongest weapon actively discourages spamming, making it so that bosses are next to impossible to cheese unless you're good enough to figure out very specific exploits. With great bosses, a much more involved story, dope as hell DLC to add even more replayability to it all, and so many more small genius design choices, Blaster Master 02 still ends up being what I believe to be the more tightly knit game out of the two. It's still one of Inti Create's finest works, and you already know that they can make some great stuff when they put their mind to it. Obviously, this is yet another item in the pile of great stuff, making it a shoo-in for this list. Scott Pilgrim vs. the World is my favorite movie, a fantastic graphic novel, and one of the best games you'll never get to play. At least that's what I thought would continue to be the case until the end of time, but thank God for its glorious comeback. For a while, this was my favorite beat 'em up, but while it left us hanging, something else came in to not only carry the torch in its stead, but surpass it in the process. River City Girls, after much mulling over, is my new favorite beat 'em up. It's so good. I played both this and Streets of Rage 4 over the course of the year, and seeing how the two differentiate themselves in terms of their approach toward the genre, it ironically made me appreciate this game more. From the moment I saw all these voice actors and YouTubers I love announcing their roles in this game, the style of the characters immediately grabbed my attention, so much so that I decided to look further into what kind of game this was. And honestly, the game's aesthetical prowess ended up being one of my favorite parts when it was all said and done, what with the comic book cutscenes, vibrant color palette, fashionable character designs, and expressive animations across the board, all taking to the next level with the shockingly great voice acting. Maybe not so much with the voice actors I was familiar with, but including YouTubers in the voice cast was honestly a bit worrying. But they all nailed their performances. Everyone's delivery is so on point and over the top to go perfectly in line with the cartoony feel of the game's story. Characters are so extra and I love it, with special shoutouts to our leads Kyoko and Masako. Especially Kyoko, she's my favorite. These many factors heavily contribute to the boatloads of charm dripping from the game's seams, but would you believe me when I told you that on top of all of this, the actual gameplay still manages to steal the show? No? Well, I guess I take it all back. I don't know what you want me to say to that. This particular beat 'em up features combo-driven combat akin to a traditional fighter given the Arc System Works influence. This paves the way for plenty of expression in terms of how you string together a variety of different attacks for both characters, emphasizing skill mastery and a proper understanding of the many mechanics. Enemy encounters are always lively, and boss fights progressively get more intense the further you make it into the game and gain more options to use. As a result, all of the bosses act as the great tests of skill they should be. Well, almost all of the bosses. I didn't like Noise at all. She gave me great music though, and was voiced by Erica Harlacher, so I guess I can't be too mad. Areas were varied and fun to, somewhat explore. Controls were as tight as the legendary Scott Pilgrim game, which went hand in hand with how great combos felt to pull off. And like I said earlier, the charming aspects of this game are so good. River City Girls is excellent, and coupled with the fact that it's 10 times better with a partner, this is a testament to how great games of this kind can truly be. Given that we've thrown the rulebook right out of the window, that means that technically, updated versions of games I've already played are eligible for this list. But much like me not wanting to put games I've already talked about multiple times here, it'd be a little weird if I put something like Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition on the list. It's one of my favorite games, I've talked about it a bunch, and it'd be really high. That doesn't seem fair. But with something like Catherine Full Body, it's around the middle of the list. I only ever talked about the original and passing on a previous review in last year's list for this tradition, and I played it a lot over the course of this past year, even more so than the original. So I'm gonna include it because again, it just feels right. This complete version of the mature, sexy, and experimental puzzle game demolishes the original in every aspect if you were to ask me. There is more story, more game to play, more content overall, including a bigger soundtrack. I loved the originals, but it was so small, criminally small. This version adds even more and arguably even better tracks to the collection, while pacing which songs you hear a lot better over the course of your many playthroughs. Full Body also helps with the story, painting Vincent in a much better limelight, as well as adding a ton of scenes to help express how much he and Catherine used to love each other, making the game's central conflict all the more difficult to overcome and reach a decision on. That decision, might I remind you, having no true definitive outcome thanks to player choice and the lack of a right answer, which I very much appreciate. But I don't think Catherine was the only one to benefit from the added story. Best Girl Catherine was given a lot more quality screen time as well, and I ended up loving her even more this time around. She's my favorite, but honestly, the new character, Rin, is who I feel to be the best match for Vincent, which is a testament to how well the new story elements were woven into the base narrative. I wasn't too big on the puzzle gameplay for a while there, but it's grown on me a lot the more I play this game. The difficult, on-the-spot thinking made for some truly nail-biting segments across the board, but it never felt cheap. The game was constantly teaching me new tricks and expecting me to use them as things progressed, making for a very steady difficulty curve. Before I knew it, I was pulling off some insane big brain maneuvers, all the while being a ton of fun. And before it was able to grow stale, I'd switch over to the bar and chat with the many patrons in order to hear their stories, take on whatever the hell was happening at that point in the game, play the Rapunzel arcade game if I felt like it, or just vibe with some good drinks and better company. It makes you wonder, do games with well-integrated bars just automatically become awesome? And the answer to your question is yes. Yes, they do. I already loved the original game, but this version adds so much more to make it better overall, especially with its beautiful message on love and how it refuses to be bound by anything. There are, of course, some questionable classic Atlas moments that sour a fair bit of the experience, but I find them overshadowed by all the good this game has to say in its story and the quality it delivers on the gameplay front. And with this particular iteration being available on anything and everything, I have no reason to touch the original ever again.
You must like what you see.
I'm not staring.
I've had my eyes on Octopath Traveler for a while, and after finally getting around to experiencing it, I've gotta say, it was absolutely worth the wait. First and foremost, this game is gorgeous. Having detailed sprite work harkening back to the Squeenix games that graced the SNES, mixed with background elements and HD effects, forging this pop-up aesthetic that only looks better the more I play the game. And this is easily one of the best soundtracks not just on the list, but in gaming as a medium. It's so freaking good. For those wanting the specifics, out of every game on this list, the soundtrack would land on the number 2 spot, with the soundtrack reaching the top being one we'll see in a little bit. I love this game's unique approach to storytelling by delivering 8 mini-stories simultaneously over the course of the game. It's not as cohesive as a more focused single narrative tends to be, but this was creative and I enjoyed so many of these stories and the characters that drove them the whole way through. Somehow the game made me love all 8 of them. They each have so much depth given the fact that, they all have a story surrounding them, so in that sense, tackling the game's story in this manner does a bit more good than otherwise. For those wondering, my favorites haven't changed since their first chapters. Therian and Tressa are the bee's knees, I love them so much. They're also my best characters gameplay-wise, even if one of them is kinda by default since the game literally wouldn't let me take them out of the party almost for the whole thing, which was pretty stupid all things considered. But anyway, I was never too big on turn-based combat, but this one's a lot of fun with its twists brought to the typical formula. The big game changer is BP, as you'll be able to do multiple or more powerful variants to normal attacks with a single turn. This allows for battles to move at a much faster pace on top of offering more layers of strategy. Not to mention, it puts a focus on my favorite thing ever, Girls? Seriously, the females kick ass in this game, my god. It also puts a focus on my second favorite thing ever, player skill. Because of the extra options given to me, I feel like I'm more in control of how a battle will play out, and that being at the right level isn't the sole determining factor in who will come out of battles on top. That in particular being the main reason why I tend to lean more towards action RPGs, so it's always nice when a turn-based RPG offers enough to pull me in as much as this one. The bosses were challenging, the class system was in-depth and a lot of fun to experiment with, everyone was fun to play as, and this world was very enjoyable to explore despite the seemingly linear design. Octopath Traveler is a clear labor of love, and as a result, I love it. I love it a lot. Although, just saying, I'd love it a little more without the random encounters. Oh, come on! Let me reiterate that this is not a list ordered completely based on quality. I cannot emphasize that enough. Especially when One Step from Eden is literally perfect. If my list was based on playtime alone, then this would mop the flippin' floor with everyone here. This game is so good, so fun, so addicting, so replayable, so lovable. I've spent the year playing a couple of other roguelikes, but I don't think, personally speaking, anything will ever compare to this one for a variety of reasons. The biggest one being the gameplay, as it's a refined iteration of the Mega Man Battle Network games, only taken to the next level, being fast, precise, involved, and challenging as hell. I know it's a roguelike, so it's an unspoken rule or whatever to be balls to the wall hard, but good god does this game refuse to hold back. A fact that pushed me to my limit, all the while never feeling cheap or unfair. The gameplay's ridiculously snappy with how combat's designed, and on top of that, rewards your efforts by constantly adding new attacks, buffs, and even characters at your disposal. There are 9 of them, almost all of which having different builds or gameplay styles to make for even more variety, and of course, replayability. Which, on that note, can I just say that this is one of the most replayable games I've ever experienced in my life? No? Well, I'm saying it anyway. This is one of the most replayable games I've ever experienced in my life. There is so much content, what with the game introducing 14 progressively difficult modes, the many ways to go about your runs culminating in one of 3 final bosses, the brilliant and dynamic difficulty curve surrounding your demonstrated skill level, and the constant updates going so far as to bring additional content to this day. If all of this still isn't enough for you, there's a surprising amount of lore and background story elements to dig into. The sprite work is so clean and fluid with each attack and character movement. The soundtrack is melodic, memorable, and a freaking bop in general, including tracks from Valhalla's composer. The amount of tools at your disposal allow for plenty of customization and unique builds, meaning proper understanding of the mechanics and planning ultimately prevail in a game genre so based around randomness. There's even an alternate costume for the main character that's literally Leah from CrossCode. Why is this game so good? What did I do to deserve this, man? I'm absolutely obsessed and will continue to be for a long time because One Step from Eden is such a damn solid game. And this kind of polish, dedication, and clear passion can't go unnoticed. I gotta replay the Battle Network games to see how their combat compares because my god. You know, even after my beast of a video on this very game, I somehow still struggle to find the words needed to convey my sheer adoration for Xenoblade Chronicles 2. It's a game that the more I let sit in, the more I like it. Being a game that was built up for me to experience over the course of a few years on this channel, let alone a sequel to one of the best games ever made, this had major shoes to fill and high expectations to surpass. I was both excited to dive into a massive JRPG adventure, and a little worried that I wouldn't like it as much as I was hoping I would. Given where it is on the list and taking into consideration that I cared about this game so much that I nearly talked about it for an hour, it's safe to say that this game got me. I love it. I love it so much. It's one of, if not my favorite Switch exclusive, and right up there with Xenoblade Chronicles is one of my favorite games. The story sure did take its sweet time, but the massive journey used its length to its advantage in order to get me to care about it on a level I never could have expected. All thanks to the incredible characters leading the charge. Rex, Pyra, Tora, Poppy, Nia, and especially Mithra are all just a handful of the phenomenal characters the game introduced me to, the latter of which managing to be my favorite Xenoblade character in general. And remember when I said that Octopath Traveler was my second favorite soundtrack on the list? Take a wild guess what number 1 is. No, really, guess. Seriously, take a wild guess. I don't know why you're just standing there, just take a guess, damn it! It's Xenoblade Chronicles 2. This soundtrack is huge, memorable, brimming with personality, and of such high quality that it plays on loop in heaven. True fact, look it up. There's so much to do in this game that it's straight up overwhelming. Where do I even start? You've got customization options not just for your main character, but for their sentient weapons called blades, who end up feeling like party members all on their own. There are also dozens of these blades you're able to pull from the in-game gacha system, all featuring their own playstyles and unique designs should you pull a rare one. Each party member in Blade has their own skill tree to raise your combat capabilities even further. But on that note, and since I don't want to be here all day listing the crap ton of stuff this game offers, the biggest time-sinking contributing factor to my love for this game is the battle system. It's got a couple of issues I'm not too big on, but most of them can be fixed by gaining a proper understanding of the complex mechanics and techs available for you to take advantage of. There's an emphasis on team synergy, comboing, and constantly switching up elements in order to dish out hundreds, thousands, and potentially millions of damage points. It's a bit ridiculous and over the top, yet deep and satisfying to figure out, if not a little frustrating given the terrible tutorials, but man, if it wasn't a hell of a great time when it all finally clicked. Oh, and did I mention that this game has DLC that not only offers even more to the main campaign, but an entirely separate side campaign that can and does stand alone as its own title? I didn't. Well, it does. And it's great, so great. With all this praise and gushing, why isn't Xenoblade Chronicles number 2 number 1? Well, not only do I feel the number 1 entry stands on the same plane as this while impacting my year on a personal level a smidge more, this particular entry on the list bends the rules more than any other. I technically played this before 2020, but barely got anywhere and went years without giving it proper attention. I might as well have come into this game completely blind for this year's complete playthrough, so I wanted to include it regardless. But it'd admittedly be a bit weird to give it the number 1 slot with this knowledge. Even if I didn't take that reason into consideration, I'd still put the number 1 entry in the number 1 slot. I just thought it was worth bringing up since that was on my mind a good amount of time while producing this video. With all of that being said though, that just begs the question, Mr. Revolution, are you single? Why yes, dear viewer, yes I am, but let's save that for later. I'm sure you're also wondering what the number 1 entry is. Any guesses? What a wild ride, wouldn't you say? Although, I'd like to say that there's been somewhat of a method to the madness, so let's lay it all out one more time. On top of the game's general quality, the big thing is that it had to have some sort of substantial impact on my personal year. Because with countdowns especially, the bias is real. I leave my professionalism for the revolutionary reviews. Somewhat. That being said, number 1 has to be something special. Something to truly stand amongst the crowd. A crowd that, let me remind you, has included some of my favorite games. With all of this in mind, what the hell could it be? What managed to top a game that's been consuming my very being, and another that stole my heart completely by surprise? Was that cut the BS and just say it's CrossCode already? Okay. Yeah, it's CrossCode. Just like with Xenoblade 2, my opinion is constantly rising on CrossCode the more I let it sit in, because my god, it's incredible. Immediately, the game catches your eye with detailed sprite work harkening back to the 16-bit era, only with additional flair thanks to the power of modern system hardware. This goes hand in hand with the general aesthetic of it all, featuring eye-catching character designs and an expressive cast. That cast, might I add, being full of likable characters when I got to know them. The game's plot wasn't moving too fast for a good portion of the game, but I couldn't have cared less because just vibing with everyone in the in-game MMO was a blast. And this particular setting was taken full advantage of not just in the story, but the gameplay as well. This is an action RPG and a really good one at that, being incredibly challenging but featuring a steady, consistent difficulty curve. And I don't just mean that with fighting, but also with the intricate galaxy-brain dungeons. This game gets really damn hard, but your improving skill, combat capabilities, and puzzle-solving prowess make it so that you're accountable at all times. There's a brilliant skill tree in this game that paves the way for a variety of playstyles and strategy, while even adding some layers of replayability. This is also one of the few games I've played where the side quests are so well done it almost feels like if you're not doing a good portion of them, you're playing the game wrong. They stayed interesting, varied, and felt like additional content to the game rather than busy work to raise my EXP and money. There are so many decisions like this, acting as proof that this game was a result of passionate RPG fans wanting to bring many conveniences to the table while addressing common complaints to the genre as a whole, creating a game fully aware of what it wants to do and succeeding at it. And it's not even done! They're adding even more content to this game that I'm not even a little salty about anymore. I'm just hyped that there's extra crap coming to this game already packed as tight as it is. I could keep going on, but like I said, the game's personal impact is what ultimately gave it the edge. Before CrossCode, I was almost afraid to come out of my comfort zone in order to try out new games, because there's not enough time in this world to pour a bunch of hours into a game I might not like. I've got videos to make, stuff to do, etc, but something about CrossCode just pulled me in, made me want to take a risk. So I did, and I was rewarded with a phenomenal RPG addressing so much of what I want to see out of these types of games. Not to mention, it even encouraged me to take a risk in covering it on the channel, because even though my indie reviews tend to bomb, I couldn't not talk about the fantastic game I just experienced. Even that came with its rewards, as many new viewers who love this game came to support some rando's video, including the official CrossCode account, which blew my mind. It never fails to surprise me how much a shared love for a game can pull people together. And when I say all this, I really hope it doesn't come off as bragging, because that's not what I'm trying to do. It just gets hard sometimes, this whole YouTube thing, I mean. I've been at it for so long, and growth has been great, don't get me wrong, but slow when compared to other people I know. It's a little discouraging, and sometimes it feels like my hard work doesn't get as much attention as I believe it should. Coupled with a year consumed by negativity and cynicism, it's kinda hard to stay motivated, as you can tell by how much content slowed down around the middle of the year. But games like these, along with meeting great people who share a love for them, keep me going. Viewers like you who constantly come back as a showcase of your respect for my work keep me going. Milestones like 10,000 subscribers act as a reminder that while my rate of growth may not be as high as I want it to be, it's still growth all the same. People care and want me to succeed. I have the potential to succeed. This game honestly made me think about a lot of that, so on top of being a damn solid video game in its own right, it acted as a catalyst for some self-reflection. How could that not be enough to give it the throne on this particular list? With all that being said, let me give you all a wholehearted thank you. Thank you for getting me this far, watching, listening, engaging, and making this creative outlet a dream come true. Thank you for helping me survive the crap show that was 2020. This channel and all the engagement you gave me helped push me through it all. The journey's just beginning, and I'm really hoping you all are here to stay. After all, we made it through this crap show of a year. What the hell can stop us now?